Now, and we've come across this before a few years ago, but a complaint has been made to the Anti-Defamation Commission about an offensive costume that has popped up in a shop in Clarinda in Melbourne South East. Now, I recall that back in 2015, someone else rang to complain about this. But what it is, it's a costume presumably for a dress-up party, and it's in a bag, and the costume is entitled Terrorist Man. I'll repeat that, Terrorist Man. And what you get is a big beard that makes you look a bit like Osama bin Laden, sort of a camouflage jacket, a toy plastic submachine gun, and a white robe and head covering that looks sort of vaguely Islamic. And just to reinforce that point, they've got pictures of minarets, the sort of onion-shaped Islamic domes, which are common at the top of mosques. So, is this costume offensive? We might stick up a copy of it on our website, 3aw.com.au. Do I find it offensive? Probably. I can see why it might offend some people. I mean, terrorists like Osama bin Laden and plenty of other Islamic terrorists have killed thousands of people over the past 20 years. It's a bit like, should you be allowed to go to a dress-up party in an SS uniform, for example? Most people would frown at that these days. Joining us on the line now is the head of the Anti-Defamation Commission, Dr. Dvir Abramovich. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Tom. As always, glad to be with you.
Good to talk with you. Now, I assume you've seen the picture of the costume?
Yes, I have. I have to say that I had to do a double take and sort of shook my head in disbelief when I first came across this downright insensitive and disgraceful costume. I couldn't believe that someone actually made these inappropriate costumes, but B, they were offered for sale here in Melbourne. So,
do you personally find it offensive?
Look, I've come across some costumes in the past that were downright appalling, but this one I think really takes bad taste and offensiveness up a notch. And I think that it really goes too far, and I think it will get the thumbs down from most parents who will find this sickening. Like you said, there's nothing remotely funny or fun or cool about dressing up as a terrorist. And maybe we should remind your listeners that they know this, that terrorists are stone-hearted murderers responsible for horrific bloodshed and suffering that have affected so many lives. Like you said, thousands of people have died in terrorist attacks.
Okay, so now you've had an official complaint made. So what the person who made the complaint, do they have to describe why they found it offensive?
They did, and they said to me, and I absolutely agree with them, just ask anyone who's lost loved ones to terrorist attacks and to those who've been injured by the evil and brutal acts of terrorism, if they think that killing and death are subject for a dress-up. Look, Tom, it's real simple. Terrorism should never be the stuff of children's or adults' costumes. It shouldn't be glorified or celebrated in any way. So what is the message that we're conveying here? The terrorists are people that you may want to dress up. It's not okay. Terrorism is a serious issue. It shouldn't be downplayed or diminished. And those who are making the costumes and those who are selling them really need to take a long, hard look at themselves and reflect on what they're doing.
So what would you do? Would you try and have the costume removed from sale at this shop in Clarinda?
Look, I think we've spoken in the past about certain things. I'm not for banning or censoring things, but I do believe that individuals and companies have to act morally, and they need to think twice about their conduct and behavior. And, in this case, stay away from costumes that make light of terrorism. The other issue that probably we should discuss is that this costume also fuels and reinforces the slur and these bigoted stereotypes that all Muslims are terrorists. And I don't think we want to be part of a community that harmfully scapegoats and stigmatizes the Muslim community. That's not acceptable.
Yeah, although every person in the last few years convicted of a terrorist act in this country has in fact been a Muslim, as I understand. I mean, it doesn't mean that all Muslims are terrorists, far from it, but I mean, if you were to ask anybody to draw a picture of a terrorist at the moment, like when I was young and growing up, it would have been an Irish terrorist. It would have been someone with a thick Northern Irish accent and a balaclava on, but that's changed as history has changed.
And I'm actually glad that you brought this up, because I think we need to see attitudes shift. And I think these kinds of costumes set us back. We have to acknowledge that when you generalize and you stereotype, it has consequences in the real world. And yes, there have been Muslims, or those claiming to be Muslims, but we know that they have a very perverse and very twisted notion of what the Muslim religion is. Let's also remind people, Tom, and I think you're old enough to remember Timothy McVeigh, 1995,
Yes.
in the Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people. Anders Breivik, who in 2001 killed 77 people in Norway. So we have to be careful that we don't promote the notion that anyone who dresses in traditional Islamic clothing and has a beard is a terrorist.
Well, but this costume's also got a camouflage jacket and a submachine gun, so it's not just an Islamic costume.
Right, but I think it's pretty clear.
Yeah, it is.
Anybody who sees this would not think that these were Scandinavian people. It's pretty clear that the message here is that this is a Muslim man.
I take your point, though, but I remember years ago going to a dress-up ball and seeing someone dressed as a Catholic bishop, and well, let's just say he had a doll figure of a young boy as part of the costume. I won't go into too much detail; it's not very tasteful. But the point is, that was mocking in a pretty rude way the Catholic Church. I mean, and given what we learned at the recent Royal Commission, that I would say that sort of mocking is deserved. I mean, where do we draw the line here?
I think we draw the line with costumes that are patently and clearly hurtful, offensive, denigrate anyone. And it doesn't always have to be, in this case it was a Muslim. But for example, it can be somebody who's mentally disabled, or somebody who's paralyzed, or women in certain costumes. I think we've come a long way over the last few years, and probably decades, to understand that, you may wear it for a day, that costume, or for an evening, but it stigmatizes and it demonizes an entire group.
I get that, but can you demonize a senior figure in the Catholic Church? And again, I'll just draw your attention to what I'm sure you're aware of in the Abuse Royal Commission here and many similar investigations overseas. I would have thought the senior figures in the church deserve that sort of mocking, even if it does offend them.
I think we have to look at each case individually and to assess. And I think we all have moral codes and values that we bring into play when we look at certain issues, as you do. So I think here we have a clear case of something which is simply unacceptable and something that we shouldn't encourage. But you're right, there may be cases whereby, and look, I'm not into censoring or banning or telling anybody what's funny, but I think there are certain cases that clearly cross the line. And I think this one is a very, very clear case of that. What's the message that we're sending kids? That it's okay to dress up as a terrorist. I think we have to, at one point, say enough is enough. We do have certain standards and certain values that we want to reinforce. And that's when the adults have to stand up in the room and say, this is not right. Yeah,
I tend to agree with you in this case, but it's a difficult one. Thank you, Dr. Abramovich, Dvir Abramovich, the chairman of the Anti-Defamation Commission. Have a look at our website, 3aw.com.au, picture of the offending costume. It's called Terrorist Man. It's clearly an Islamic get-up. It also involves a beard, a camouflage jacket and a toy submachine gun. But again, I'll say, plenty of people mock the Catholic Church, probably rightly so. Go to the Mardi Gras. Every year there's usually a float with men dressed up as nuns, for example. Does that offend nuns? Quite possibly it does. Should it be banned? 91600 693 13 13 32. It's 19 after 4.